Well, thank you, Betsy, and good morning still, everyone. I'm Jena Griswold, Colorado Secretary of State. Thank you for joining me today as I officially certify the 2020 general election. This is a very special day for voters, election officials, and Colorado. It commemorates the will of the people and the strength of our democracy. 2020 started with Colorado's first presidential primary in 2 decades, and the first one in our state's history in which unaffiliated voters could participate. Within weeks of that successful election, COVID-19 took grip of our state and of the nation. And Colorado's election system, renowned as the nation's gold standard, was truly put to the test. I am so proud to report that despite having to administer statewide elections both in pandemic conditions and with extensive false election narratives swirling throughout the nation, officials from my office and from the county clerk's offices across the state rose to the challenge. We quickly adapted. My office rolled out safety measures like sending PPE to all counties and establishing sick pay for election judges. We increased drop boxes by over 55% from 2018, added 42 additional voting centers, recruited thousands of election judges, and worked with partners from the Ute Mountain Ute and the Southern Ute tribes to increase Native American access. We rolled out ballot tracks across the state, increasing transparency, and text to cure to make it easier to fix signature discrepancies. And Colorado led the nation in countering foreign disinformation. All this hard work paid off. Success is the fact that over 3.2 million Coloradans had their voices heard in the 2020 general election, which is more voter participation than ever before in any election in our state's history. Our turnout rate for this election was 86.5% among active registered voters and 76.4% among the voting eligible population, ranking Colorado second in the nation for turnout. For Colorado's 2020 general election, women voters accounted for 51.1% of ballots returned, while men accounted for 47.2%. Coloradans overwhelmingly used the new statewide voting programs. A total of 1.7 million voters, which is 53.8% of all ballots returned, enrolled in the statewide ballot track system. And over 11,000 voters utilized text-to-cure software to cure signature discrepancies. Young people turned out this election at 76.7%. That's more than 3 out of every 4 young voters making their voices heard. 94% of all ballots were cast using a mail ballot. 86% of ballots were returned during early voting before Election Day. And 12,260 people took advantage of same-day registration here in Colorado. I'm also proud of our partnership with the Ute Mountain Ute and the Southern Ute to increase access to voting. Native Americans living on tribal lands in Colorado did not have guaranteed voting rights until as late as 1970. And our work is to counter this historical voter suppression. In 2019, we worked to guarantee drop boxes and voting centers on tribal lands and made registering to vote easier. This year, we worked closely with the tribes to increase our outreach efforts in order to facilitate access. In result, turnout for active voters living on the Ute Mountain Ute tribal lands increased from 36% in 2016 to nearly 50% in 2020. While for the Southern Utes, turnout increased from 46% in 2016 to 70% in 2020. My office's proactive work and close partnership with tribal councils led to these extraordinary increases in access and turnout. And I look forward to seeing those numbers increase even more in the coming elections. I'm also proud of election officials like Sarah Rosen of Grand County, Molly Fitzpatrick of Boulder County, and Angela Myers of Larimer County, each of whom ran outstanding elections in the midst of our state's devastating wildfires. Of special note, the East Troublesome Fire was so close to Hot Sulphur Springs that Clerk Rosen was forced to evacuate her election office in the middle of early voting. Remarkably, due to her extraordinary efforts, over 82% of Grand County voters cast a ballot this election. In addition to these heroics, Kathy Simillian, clerk and recorder for Gunnison County, and her 2 election employees contracted COVID-19 after Election Day. Despite this, Clerk Simillian and her team completed the election and submitted certified results last week. Finally, Josh Ziegelbaum of Adams County expanded voting access by opening a voting center on the Sunday before Election Day. As you can see, many people worked together to make this 2020 election a success. And with that, I am now going to sign the certification making the 2020 election official. The 2020 election has officially concluded. Thank you to my staff, the county clerks and their offices, as well as Colorado voters for making Colorado's 2020 election such an enormous success. And with that, we would love to take any questions.
All right, it looks like John Frank with the Colorado Sun is up first. Go ahead, John.
Thanks so much for taking the time. Questions on a couple different topics. One, I wanted to give you a chance to respond to this letter from Republican lawmakers expressing concerns about the software company Colorado uses, or at least 90% of the counties use, Dominion voting systems, and their call for an audit and a special legislative committee to look at this. And secondly, I'm wondering if you're disappointed that the new efforts you put in place to lower the rate of rejected ballots didn't quite work, and why you feel like that is the case, on why that rate didn't change in 2020 compared to 2016.
Well, thank you, John, for the two-factor questions. In terms of the request for an audit, I would say we have the utmost confidence in the integrity of Colorado's elections. And Colorado is considered the safest state in which to cast a ballot for good reason, including all the audits that we do. So not only does the voting equipment that we use, not only was it selected by bipartisan teams, any upgrades or shifts are both certified by the federal agency as well as my team, and we have rigorous testing and audits prior to the election. And after the election, of course, we do a risk limiting audit, which shows to a high statistical degree of certainty that the election results are correct. This is just one of the reasons that not only did the Washington Post call Colorado the safest state in which to cast a ballot, but President Trump's own DHS secretary, former DHS secretary, Kirstjen Nielsen, said the same. In regards to Text Secure, I would say it's highly effective. Over 11,000 Coloradans use this program. We are going to collect more data on signature discrepancy in the coming weeks. And I think that we will just continue to improve on our system, and having more ways for people to correct their signatures and make their ballots count is a good thing for the state.
How will you move forward? How will you continue to improve the current system? What ideas do you have?
Well, so we're working with members and representatives from the disability community to make sure that we are always improving on initiatives that we roll out to make them more accessible. In 2019, we worked with various partners, for example, to pass legislation to make it more accessible for Coloradans with low eyesight to vote their mail ballot at home. We'll continue to work with these communities, especially on signature discrepancy. And overall, I just think the fact of it is that over 11,000 people fixed their ballots and had their voices heard with this new program. And we're always looking for ways to innovate. And that's really the story of 2020. Colorado had a great election model. We've improved it over the last 2 years. It was put to the test in the pandemic. And we've had 2 wonderful elections with many, many Coloradans voting in the middle of a pandemic in 2020.
All right, I'm going to talk to Megan Verlee here with Colorado Public Radio. Go ahead, Megan.
Hi, because I don't understand technology, you can hear me, right?
Yes, hi, Megan.
Excellent. This letter from the state representatives, the polling we've seen since this election, clearly there are a lot of voters out there who don't have faith in how the election was conducted in other states, whose faith in how the election was conducted in our state may be damaged. Do you see your office doing anything in the future to try to combat that loss of faith, and what would that look like?
Yes, Megan, that's a really good question. This election, we were faced not only with a pandemic, but false narratives coming from the highest of office holders across the nation about election models that Colorado uses, and also a deluge of foreign disinformation. We knew this was coming, at least the foreign disinformation part, and led early. I created a new unit within my office led by the former acting assistant secretary from the Department of Homeland Security on counterterrorism, who was doing this exact type of work for the Department of Homeland Security. So we created a new unit. We've worked with community members and community partners to alert Coloradans about the prevalence of foreign disinformation, and then rolled out an initiative to encourage folks to go to trusted sources of information for election information. Now we're going to have to continue those efforts, both in combating false narratives, both from foreign adversaries and domestic elected officials and other domestic actors. And we'll continue to push out good information. I will say that I've been very happy to see many Republicans standing up and really standing for our election system, including just recently two top Republican county clerks who did a joint session that to underline how safe and secure Colorado's election systems are.
To follow up on that, do you see any new transparency measures needed in how the counties do their work and how the state does its work for elections in the future?
Quick check-in. Betsy, can you hear me okay? There's some background noise.
I can hear you okay.
Okay. So in terms of transparency, we'll always look to increase transparency. But a lot of the false narratives are not based on reality. And the truth of it is Colorado's election model is incredibly transparent. So we're always open to innovate. Specifically, this legislative session, I think there is great opportunity to continue to bolster Colorado's place as a leader to counter foreign disinformation. And also going back to 2019, and one of the reasons that I ran for Secretary of State is to bring more transparency to money in politics. We'll continue to look at ways to improve our elections, our security, to fight against corruption and the corroding effects of dark money in politics. And we'll continue to lead the nation in all those efforts.
All right, any additional questions? John, did you have an additional question?
I did, thank you. Madam Secretary, the last thing you just mentioned, look for ways to improve transparency when it comes to dark money in politics. We just published a story this morning showing that the two largest individual donors to ballot campaigns were nonprofits that don't disclose donors. And that's possible because the law you pushed in 2019 didn't include them in the disclosure requirements. Do you plan on revisiting that law, and how would you address that loophole, which is allowing tens of millions of dollars of nonprofit dark money to rule Colorado's elections?
Well, John, thank you for the question on campaign finance. I have to disagree with your framing. The reason that it's hard to get disclosure of nonprofits is actually because of Citizens United and the constitutional guardrails around transparency with NGOs. One of the great things we did in the campaign finance reform in 2019 was, for the first time ever, require that spending on ballot initiatives goes along with a disclaimer. And that's one of the things that we could do under current constitutional guardrails and barriers towards transparency. So we'll always work on increasing transparency. Specifically, we will do as much as we can, but ultimately, like so many of our problems, these are state solutions, trying to find solutions to what is really a federal problem. When it comes to election integrity, we need federal guardrails, adopting a lot of Colorado's reforms. That includes vote by mail for all, same-day voter registration, hundreds and hundreds of drop boxes in voting centers, just like in Colorado. When it comes to combating election disinformation, we are leading the nation and really setting in the footsteps or stepping up to the lack of leadership from the Senate and the executive. We will do everything we can and will continue to lead the nation to combat disinformation, but we need a nationwide policy and really federal law to combat disinformation. And when it comes to campaign finance reform, I will always push for more transparency. I, of course, am not a legislator. We bring ideas and potential legislation to the legislature. They pass it, but within the confines of the US Constitution and case law. So I am very supportive of whatever means possible to chip away or to revoke Citizens United. I do believe that money is corrupting our politics, especially when it's dark money. And I'm very proud of our work in 2019 to increase transparency of that money. So we'll continue to chip away at that. And I will mention from our 2019 legislation, there was so much that was crucial to this year, including banning foreign money in Colorado politics, increasing the number of drop boxes to over 55% of what they were in 2018, adding more access to voting centers, and for the first time guaranteeing a voting center or drop box on all of our public universities and all the tribal lands in Colorado.
One quick follow-up question. Do you plan on running for re-election in 2022?
Yes, I do.
Thank you.